Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
This process is called wedging, and I get mine into Hershey Kiss shape. You want a flat bottom, and the reason I pound it down is so the bottom is smooth. I have two or three different kinds of clay that I use: a white stoneware, a gray stoneware, and a red stoneware. And I keep them separated in the studio so they don't, contaminate one another. And so it's in bags. The clay is in bags, and if you're using from a new bag, you don't have to usually wedge, but the clay that I picked up here is older clay reclaimed. That means all the water was taken out, and I have to wedge this a little bit before I sit down and throw with it, so all the particles are in place. And I use what we call bats so that when the piece is finished, you can just lift it up from the wheel. But I want it on there without any wiggle. Throw it on the wheel, and you wet your hands and start. I was a very slow learner. Some people get it right away, but for me it was a hard process. I think the best lesson to learn is not to let the clay control your hands. You try to control the clay. There's no wrong way. But when you teach, you have to teach how you know, and then from there, people develop their own styles. I've seen many people do the same thing. It's just a matter of using a left thumb versus a right thumb, different fingers, knuckles. It seems like no matter what people use, if they're used to throwing, know what they're doing, it all eventually becomes a pot. I'm kind of a obsessive cleaner. I like everything, my hands. I don't like the clay on my hands. I don't like the clay on the wheel, so I'm always using that sponge. I'm more of what you would call a utilitarian potter. I like to make things that people can use in their homes: bowls, casseroles, cups, plates, serving dishes. Once in a while I get a little fancy and I'll make something that's just for display. Most of the time when I sit down at the wheel, I've got an idea of what the shape is going to be of the item that I'm throwing. This one just kind of happened. It's a bowl. And this knife also has a history. It was my knife that I started with in 1976, and here it is, useful still. Okay. Now I'll use the same clay for the hand building. What I'm getting ready for here is a hand-built piece that I started doing back in the day when I was teaching in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. At that time, I wasn't even sure I could send her a pot yet. But teaching helps you learn how to do things better. I want them to become just what they want to be. I like them odd shaped, and I will put a design into this one. And potters are notorious for picking up many odd things off the street from our grocery stores. These happen to be pop containers, you know, when you buy the 6-pack. But I found it makes a really cool design in the clay. I use a colorant called iron oxide, which shows the raw clay, but in a darker color than the clay is when it's fired. And then to get its shape, pick it up and arrange it on a simple cardboard tube. This one happens to be covered with an old nylon, but any cloth will work. And you want the cloth so it doesn't stick. And then it becomes that shape. This will take till overnight for this to become stiff and stiff enough to take it off and either smooth an edge that might be rough or for me to sign it on the back. So that'll take until tomorrow morning. And then it takes about, if it's warm down here, about 4 days for it to dry. Sometimes when I want to get a kiln load in and I don't have a lot of time, because I'm a procrastinator, I take things up to the our stove in the living room, our wood stove, and that dries things out just wonderfully. You bisque an item first, they turn pink, and then after they're out of the kiln for the first time, you glaze them and do the process all over again. Although that's a little bit longer. The glaze firing is longer than the bisque. Then they're ready for the glazing. And these are 3 different ones that I've done with different designs. Fishies in the water, just a random design that I have carved on a piece of bisqueware. And they're a useful item, but they're a little different and decorative too. I think a lot of my inspiration comes from nature. I love nature. And I see a lot of natural things in my pottery. I love being a part of the Edge of the Wilderness Artists League. It's been a blessing for me. The art world up here is so much more than I thought it would be when I came to live up here. I wasn't aware from 1984 until 2001 what was out there and available in our particular little area. I had no plan. I still have no plan. I'm just happy just doing what I'm doing now. I don't need to do any more. Just continue on.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.